This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
హలో హలో వినిపిస్తుందండి? హలో హలో మల్లికార్జున్, హలో 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 హలో
హలో
హలో
హలో హలో అన్న.
వినిపిస్తుందా?
వినిపిస్తున్నాను.
స్టార్ట్.
Okay, good morning students. Hope you are all doing well. So today we are going to discuss the new chapter, the male genital tract. Okay, so I'm going to discuss today regarding the malformations of the male genital tract. So inflammatory lesions of the male genital tract and neoplasms of the male genital tract. So in this topic I'm going to cover regarding the lesions of the penis, lesions of the testes, and the lesions of the prostate. So first today the first we'll discuss the malformations of the penis. Okay, the most common malformations of the penis include the abnormal, the position of the urethra. Okay, so abnormal position of the, so suppose the urethral opening, if it is opens on dorsal aspect of the penis, we call it as epispadias. Suppose the urethral opening is there on the ventral aspect instead of at the normal central point, so we are calling it as hypospadias. So compared to epispadias, hypospadias is more common than epispadias. Okay, so what is the problem with this abnormal position of the urethral opening? So what happens is at the urethral opening, sometimes it may get obstructed, resulting in what repeated urinary tract infections. Okay, this is the problems with this, and it may be asked as MCQs, what is meant by epispadias, what is meant by hypospadias. So epi is on dorsal aspect, hypo is on ventral aspect. So please remember these two important MCQs. Okay, now coming to the inflammatory lesions of the penis, which include balanitis and melanoposthitis. So referring to the local inflammation of the glans penis, we call it as a balanitis. Suppose if the inflammation extends to the prepuce, then we call it as a melanoposthitis. Okay, so very simple things to understand, but what you should know, what is meant by balanitis, what is meant by melanoposthitis, because regularly these patients do come to our urology and general surgery office. So you should know these terms. Most cases occur as a consequence of poor local hygiene in uncircumcised males with accumulations of desquamated epithelial cells, sweat, and debris, which is termed as smegma, which acts as a local irritant. Okay, so that's why there's a reason all men should clean the smegma. So when they are actually bathing, okay, every day we should clean the smegma. Otherwise, what happens? There is a prone for what inflammatory lesions, and later on it may turn into the neoplastic lesions. So this is the importance I want to stress. Okay, so you have to clean the glans penis and of course the prepuce while bathing. Okay, next important thing is the phimosis. It represents a condition in which the prepuce cannot be retracted. Okay, so while cleaning the smegma, so what we have to do is you have to retract the prepuce. Okay, it normally retracts actually. So those who are circumcised, especially in certain communities like Muslims, what happens is they go for circumcision during the childhood itself. Okay, so in those individuals there is no problem with the smegma because there will be no prepuce to collect the smegma. So those who are uncircumcised like Hindus, okay, So what happens is you have to retract the prepuce. Okay. So if you are unable to retract the prepuce, it's called as phimosis. And suppose it cannot, if you cannot able to revert back it, then it is called as a paraphimosis. So these are the two important terms you should remember it. Coming to neoplasms of the penis, the most common neoplasm is the squamous cell carcinoma and its Picker's lesions. Okay, so many are associated with poor hygiene. Just now we discussed regarding smegma. Okay, so those are not cleaning properly, those who don't maintain proper hygiene. So what happens is there is an accumulation of smegma, and in that smegma, what happens is there is oncogenic chemicals which actually stimulate and of course will promote the cancer. Okay. Now, the second thing is smoking, and the most important thing is infection with human papillomavirus, particularly type 16 and 18. So these are the two important genotypes which cause cancer. We also come across this same virus in cervical carcinoma with the same genotypes 16 and 18. Okay. So where is the location in for squamous cell carcinoma for the penis? So most commonly we see lesions on the glands or on the shaft of the penis. Most of the times we see on the glands, or what happens is sometimes it extends even to the prepuce. So and sometimes what happens, it goes back and it extends to the shaft of the penis. So with an ulcerated infiltrated lesion that may spread to the inguinal nodes and infrequently to the distal sites. The one more important point I want to mention is, suppose a squamous cell carcinoma has extended to the inguinal nodes. What happens is it will become a radio-resistant malignancy. So okay, so usually the squamous cell carcinomas of the cervix and of course the penis is radio-sensitive. Suppose it has gone infiltrated to the inguinal lobe, what will happen? It will become radio-resistant. So first you should treat with surgery followed by other modalities of treatment like chemotherapy. So I already emphasized regarding the circumcision. So most cases of squamous cell carcinoma occurs in uncircumcised males, those who doesn't maintain any proper hygiene. This is a picture of a squamous cell carcinoma in situ, otherwise called as a Bowen's disease. So you can see here, so the epithelium, the basement membrane is intact. If you see the tumor cells, most of the tumor cells are dysplastic, and so there is a dyskaryosis, and there is a defective in the maturation also. So here you can see there is the keratotic cell, dyskeratotic cell, and you can also see the atypical mitotic figure. And one cell is undergoing apoptosis, and we see the entire thickness of the epithelium. So you can see many of the mitotic figures, atypical cells, occupying the entire epithelium of the. So one good thing is that the tumor cells has not reached the basement membrane. It is confined to the. So it is confined to the epithelium itself. That's why it is called as squamous cell carcinoma in situ, otherwise called as Bowen disease. So very, very important. So please remember the term Bowen disease. Okay. So it may come as either 2 marks question or 4 marks question. So during my MBBS exam, I got it as a 10 marks question. So if you don't know what is meant by Bowen disease, okay, so you will lose 10 marks. So I got 10 marks in surgery essay question in surgery exam as 10 marks, Bowen disease. So please students do remember what is meant by Bowen disease. So it is nothing but a squamous cell carcinoma in situ occurring on the penis. Next is the invasive carcinoma. You can see the picture how aggressive it is. It's like the exophytic cauliflower like growth going outside the shaft of the penis. Next, we are going into the testes, the lesions of the penis over. Now we are going into the testes. So the most common congenital anomaly we encounter with the testis is cryptorchidism. What is meant by cryptorchidism? It is nothing but a incomplete descent of the testis from the abdomen to the scrotum, and is present in about 1% of 1-year-old male infants. Okay, so you should remember what is meant by cryptorchidism is nothing but an incomplete descent of the testis. So sometimes it is bilateral and unilateral. Also, actually unilateral is common. Sometimes it occurs in bilateral patients. So what happens is because of the incomplete descent, what will happen? That the testicular tubules, the seminiferous tubules will undergo atrophy, and so because of the atrophy of the seminiferous tubules, what happens is the patient will become sterile. Okay, so and one more important risk regarding this cryptogenic testis is, so it carries a 3 to 5-fold higher risk for testicular cancer. Okay, so usually which occurs from the intratubular germ cells. So initially what happens is this intratubular germ cells will undergo neoplasia, resulting in intratubular germ cell neoplasia. Within that atrophic tubules, later on it will become germ cell neoplasia. Okay, so orchipexy, what is meant by orchipexy? Orchipexy is nothing but, so wherever is there the line of descent, so it is brought down to the testis and it is fixed to the scrotum. This is nothing but a orchipexy. So what does this orchipexy will do is, will reduce the risk of sterility and cancer, but does not eliminate the risk of cancer and infertility. Okay, this is a very tricky MCQ. So please do remember, orchipexy reduces the risk of sterility and cancer, but does not eliminate the risk of cancer and sterility or infertility. Okay, so this point you should remember. Okay, that's all about cryptorchidism. It may come as a 2 marks or 4 marks question. The importance of it is, so the tubular atrophy and sterility and formation of the tumors, neoplasia, germ cell tumors. Next is the inflammatory lesions of the testis. So usually initially the infection may be elsewhere in the urinary tract infection. Most of the times infection will be elsewhere in the urinary tract infection. From there, infection usually comes to the epididymis. From there, it will go into the testis. This is how it comes. So initially it starts as non-specific epididymis. Later on it will be architis. So actually, one important point I want to very emphasize here is the mumps architis. So initially we get everybody, in childhood, so we get mumps infection resulting in enlargement of both bilateral salivary glands. So what happens is, so apart from salivary glands, it may also infect the testis. So it resulting in extensive necrosis, loss of seminiferous epithelium, tubular atrophy, fibrosis, and sterility. Okay, so this point you should remember: mumps causing severe architis, leading to infertility, sterility. Okay, so for one of the reasons for male infertility is mumps architis. Next is testicular tuberculosis. I reported a good number of cases of testicular tuberculosis. Even I have done FNA in few of the cases which are referred by surgeons. So testicular tuberculosis. Okay, again it begins in the infection epididymis and later on it will involve the testis. So apart from inflammatory things, one more important thing we should remember regarding the testis is torsion or testis. Otherwise called as twisting of the spermatic. What happens is, because of this torsion, there is obstruction of the venal channels and there will be the dilatation of the arteries. Okay, it resulting in it. What happens is, so if you don't correct within 6 hours, what happens? If you don't correct, if you don't brought this patient with it to the hospital within 6 hours and surgery is not done within 6 hours, or orchipexy is not done within 6 hours, what happens is, so the testis will undergo necrosis. It will undergo infarction, initially infarction, later on it will undergo necrosis. Okay, so the first 6 hours is very precious, and the only one modality for treatment of torsion is the surgery. So if you bring as early as possible, if you do surgery as early as possible, you can save the testis. Next is the testicular tumors. So this is very interesting. These tumors. So please, everybody, please follow. My entire today's class is very important, full of MCQs. They may come as either 2 marks, 4 marks, or so usually 2 marks or 4 marks. So rarely you may get as long questions in surgery exam, because in surgery, so in most of the surgical OPs, what they do is they come problems with either the male genital abnormalities in the male genitalia, or in the penis, or in the testes, or in the prostate, or some hernias. If you want to become surgeon, so please focus on this today's lecture. So testicular tumors are the most common cause of painless testicular enlargement. They occur with increased frequency in association with undescended testis, androgen insensitivity syndrome, and testicular dysgenesis. Okay, so so there is an increased risk for the for testicular tumors. So if somebody is having testicular tumor in their family, because the family history is also very important for these testicular tumors. Next important thing is the presence of isochromosome of the short arm of chromosome 12. Okay, this also you should remember. Okay, isochromosome. So you should it may come as important. I mean in your MCQs, the short arm of chromosome 12, isochromosome, will be seen in patients with testicular tumors. So most testicular tumors in post-pubertal males arise from the in situ lesion. There is intratubular germ cell infection. That's why. So this is why. That's why it is very very important. The cryptorchidism. So in most of the cases, most of the germ cell tumors or testes usually arises from the intratubular germ cells. This is what I'm saying. So germ cells are the source of 95% of testicular tumors, and the remainder arises from Sertoli or Leydig cells. Okay, so the germ cell tumors will be composed of a single histologic pattern in 60% of cases, or mixed patterns around 40% of the cases. The most common pure histologic patterns of germ cell tumors are seminoma, embryonal carcinoma, yolk sac tumor, choriocarcinoma, and teratoma. Sometimes what happens is this can be in mixed form, contain more than one element, most commonly embryonal carcinoma, teratoma, and yolk sac tumor. Okay, so this germ cell tumors could be pure or could be mixed. So they arise from the germ cells in 95% of the cases. Okay, so they can clinically they are divided into two types, either the seminomas and non-seminomatous tumors. Okay, seminoma remain confined to testes for a long time and spread mainly to the para-aortic. That's why they are divided into two types. So usually this seminoma will spread to para-aortic nodes and distal spread is rare. Whereas non-seminomatous tumors tend to spread earlier by both lymphatics and blood vessels. Because of this reason, the metastatic lesions will be more in non-seminomatous tumors. And again, HCC is produced by syncytial trophoblast and is always related to patients with choriocarcinomas and those with seminomas containing syncytial trophoblast. So AFP is elevated when there is a yolk sac tumor component. So this is the list of testicular neoplasms. The first one is the seminoma. So usually it occurs in the age group at the 40 to 50. So what does it contain? Is it contains sheets of uniform polygonal cells with cleared cytoplasm, and there will be a lymphocytes in the stoma. So what we are discussing is the classic seminoma, the description. So there is a variant of seminoma called spermatocytic seminoma that I will tell in the next slide. So this 10% of the patients that have seminoma have elevated HCC. Next is the embryonal carcinoma. Usually it occurs in the age group of 20 to 30 in the second decade, and these contain poorly differentiated, undifferentiated pleomorphic cells in cords, sheets, or sometimes papillary formation, and most contain some yolk sac and choriocarcinoma cells. I mean, the mixed type can be in association with the embryonal carcinoma. Actually, the pure form is actually rare. I mean, it's less actually. Pure form is only seen in 10% of the individuals. Okay, so tumor markers will be negative in pure forms of embryonal carcinoma. Next is the yolk sac tumor. So this is very important MCQ here. The yolk sac tumor occurs at the very young age, at around 3 years. This is the most common testicular tumor which comes at the very young age, at the age of 3 years. Again, it contains poorly differentiated endothelium-like cuboidal columnar cells, and in 90% of the patients have elevated alpha-fetoprotein levels. Next is the choriocarcinoma. Again, it occurs in a reproductive age between 20 to 30. So it contains both cytotrophoblast and syncytial trophoblast without villus formation. And in 100%, almost all patients, there will be elevated HCC. This teratoma, so it can come at any age, and it contains all the 3 germ layers with varying degrees of differentiation, and tumor markers will be negative in teratomas. And we already discussed about mixed tumors. It occurs in the age group of in second decade 15 to 30, and morphology will be variable depending upon the type of tumor it contains. The most common is the mixture of teratoma and embryonal carcinoma, and 90% of the patients have elevated HCC and alpha-fetoprotein levels. Okay, So HCC is seen both in seminoma and of course in the 10% of the seminoma and 100% in patients with choriocarcinoma. And AFP is elevated 90% of the patients with yolk sac tumor. So next, the tumor burden, the level of, so the tumor burden will be known by the by estimating the LDH levels. The levels of LDH levels, the lactate dehydrogenase levels will correlate with the tumor burden. Approximately 90% of the patients achieve complete remission with aggressive chemotherapy and most are cured. Whereas pure choriocarcinoma carries a dismal prognosis. This is what you have to remember. So which among the following will carry very poor prognosis? So one is the pure choriocarcinoma. This is one of the important MCQ you have to remember. Pure choriocarcinoma. This is a photograph of a seminoma. So grossly how it is appearing, it has a lobulated, it is a well circumscribed lobulated appearance. So it is a pale fleshy homogeneous mass. Microscopically you can see the polyhedral cells with centrally placed irregular vesicular nuclei, prominent nuclei and cleared cytoplasm. And most important is the stroma. The stroma contains the striking lymphocytes. This is one of the very important diagnostic feature of a seminoma. The variant of seminoma is a spermatocytic seminoma. So how it is differs? Very, very important Viva question it is, and how seminoma and spermatocytic seminoma are very different. So the here is, so affected patients in spermatocytic seminoma are older than 65 years of age. Second is the stroma doesn't contain lymphocytic infiltrates, granulomas, syncytial trophoblasts, and not admixed with other germ cell tumor histologies and not associated with intratubular germ cell neoplasia, and it will not metastasis. These are the important points regarding spermatocytic seminoma. So again, I will repeat. Seminoma, the differences between seminoma and spermatocytic seminoma. So we know that the seminoma usually occurs in the third decade between the age group of 30 and 40, but spermatocytic seminoma occurs in older individuals. So in the seminoma, again we see this type of similar type of round cells, but what happens is in the stroma there is a lot of lymphocytic infiltrate in the seminoma, whereas it is not there in spermatocytic seminoma. Next, granulomas will be there in that. Here it is not there. Syncytial trophoblasts will be there in seminoma. You won't find here in spermatocytic seminoma. And sometimes the seminoma can be with association with other germ cell tumors, but spermatocytic seminoma it won't associate with other types, and it won't have any precursor lesions like intratubular germ cell place, and it won't metastasize. These are very, very important differences between seminoma and spermatocytic seminoma. Next, embryonal carcinoma. Grossly it appears as hemorrhagic mass. In most cases, the embryonal carcinoma will be in association with other germ cell tumors like yolk sac tumor, teratoma, and choriocarcinoma. Okay, so the pure embryonal carcinomas are accounts only 2 to 3%. You see, such a low percentage. The pure embryonal carcinomas are very, very low in percentage occurrence. Here only 2 to 3%. So most of the times it will be associated with either yolk sac tumor, teratoma, or choriocarcinoma. So you can see the sheets of undifferentiated cells and forming primitive gland-like structures here. So this embryonal carcinoma contains the sheets of undifferentiated cells, which sometimes they are forming a primitive gland-like structures, and you can see the nuclear large and hyperchromatic. Next, yolk sac tumors. So this is most common primary testicular neoplasm in children younger than 3 years of age. This we discussed. So it, again, in this age, it has a very good prognosis. If you give chemotherapy, I mean, it will be gone. Okay, so it melts like ice. Okay, so it's very, very good actually. It has very good prognosis. In adults, yolk sac tumors most often are seen admixed with embryonal carcinoma. So we discussed regarding embryonal carcinoma. In most cases, it will be in association with either embryonal yolk sac tumor or choriocarcinoma. Okay, so histologic exam disclose low p-value columnar epithelial cells forming microcysts, lace-like reticular patterns, sheets, glands, and papillae. Okay, a distinctive feature is the presence of structures resembling primitive glomeruli, so-called Schiller dual bodies are seen. Tumors often have eosinophilic hyaline globulins in which alpha-1 antitrypsin and alpha-fetoprotein can be demonstrated by immunohistochemical techniques. Okay, so very striking is the tubular bodies. I so many, at least half a dozen cases of Yolk-Sac tumor I might have reported. So in most of the cases, the very important diagnostic clue is this Schiller double bodies, and sometimes you'll find hyaline globulins. So in the serum, you can also see the elevation of alpha beta protein levels. Next is the Yolk-Sac tumor. You can see the microscopic picture of Yolk-Sac tumor demonstrating loosely textured microcystic spaces, and you can also see some papillary structures resembling a glomerulus, so which is called as a Schiller double body, which is a characteristic of Yolk-Sac. Next is the choriocarcinoma. So the choriocarcinoma arises from the germ cells, neoplastic germ cells, which differentiate towards like trophoblastic glands. So here you can see, so both cytotrophoblasts and syncytial trophoblasts. The central ones are the syncytial trophoblasts, which are multinucleated with hyperchromatic nuclei, and other areas are the cytotrophoblasts, which are single cell-like, and you can see a centrally placed round nuclei. Okay, so this is the difference between cyto and syncytial. Syncytial is multinucleated, cyto is single nucleated. Okay, so this again derived from the pluripotential neoplastic germ cells, which differentiate towards the trophoblastic glands. Next is the teratoma. So teratomas, as we discussed, it can occur at any age, and it contains all the three somatic cell lines like endo, ecto, and mesodermis. These tumor form masses that cut surface contains cysts and regular areas of cartilage. They may occur at any age from infancy to adult life. Pure forms of teratoma are fairly common in infants and children, being second in frequency only to Yolk-Sac tumors. Okay, so actually in our day-to-day practice, actually we see a good number of cases of teratomas, dermoids containing all the three. Dermoid contain the purely ecto elements and few minor other elements, but most of the times we get teratomas with all the mixed elements. So these are again two types, again mature and immature. So you can see the mature ganglion cells here. So ganglion cells means what? Neural tissue is there, and you can see here respiratory epithelium. Here you can see cartilage, and here you can see the squamous epithelium. So this is what the teratoma contains, the elements which are derived from all three germ layers. You can see the stratified squamous epithelium, which is derived from the ectodermal layer, and the cartilage from mesenchymal layer. Respiratory epithelium is from endodermal layer, and again neural tissue again derived from the neuroectodermal layer. So this teratomas usually contains all the elements which are derived from all three germinal cell layers. Suppose if it contains the mature elements, we call it as a mature teratoma. Suppose if it contains the immature tissues like glass cells, then we call it as a immature cystic teratoma. Next is the prostate. So we covered the prostate, also lesions of the prostate for today. So this is the bladder. You can see the normal anatomy of the prostate, the bladder, and the urethra. From the bladder, the urethral opening enters into the prostate. So this is the proximal urethra, and this is the distal urethra. So in between we have the central, the prostate, which covers around the urethra, which is called as a periurethral zone or central zone, and which is surrounded by the prostate. The central zone will be surrounded by a prostate. Again, this is called a peripheral zone. So the importance of this making zones is, so the benign prostatic hyperplasia will actually comes in the central zone, and it compresses the urethra, and it causes like hystency, urgency, and nocturia. So all these problems will occur because of the benign prostatic hyperplasia, which usually occurs in a normal, occurs at the age of 50 to 60 years in a elderly males. So whereas the carcinoma of the prostate, which occurs at the peripheral zone, and again it also forms small nodules, which can be palpated by rectum by doing distal rectal examination. Okay, so what is important in this slide is, what you have to remember is the benign prostatic hyperplasia occurs in central zone of the prostate, whereas carcinomas will occur in the peripheral zone. Before we are going to discuss about the benign nodular hyperplasia of prostate and the carcinoma, we also discussed a little bit about the inflammatory lesions of the prostate, which include E. coli prostatitis. So again, the bacterial prostate is very, very common. Again, it is because of the urinary tract infection, mainly due to the E. coli and other gram negative organisms. The second thing is the chronic non-bacterial prostate. So this also occurs. So here etiology is unknown and it won't respond with the antibiotics. Next is the granulomatous prostatitis. Again, it has a multifactorial etiology, both infectious and non-infectious. So these are the variants of prostatitis. So that actually, after, in the biopsy and of course the culture, we can be able to help you what type of prostatitis is in, and with the help of the antibiotics, you can control the bacterial prostatitis. And suppose if really the tuberculous prostatitis, so you can treat with the ADT. So next we discuss the benign prostatic hyperplasia. It is nothing but the proliferation of benign stromal and glandular elements of the prostate. So prostate contains mainly two types of elements, one is glandular elements and stromal elements. So again, it depends upon the hormone dihydrotestosterone, which is an androgen, which actually it will act on this glandular epithelial cells and the stromal cells, and it will increase the proliferation of glandular and stromal elements. So we already discussed that this benign prostatic hyperplasia occurs in the inner periurethral and central zone, and so there will be both proliferation of the glands and stromal elements. So clinically, patients will present with hesitancy, urgency, nocturia, and he says that I am passing very poor urinary stream. Okay. Whereas chronic obstruction due to recurrent urinary tract infections, so in due course of time, it may present as acute urinary obstruction. So this is how it looks. So you can see the nodular formation of the prostatic glands. You can see, so there is a both proliferation of the stromal and of course the glandular elements forming a nodules. That's why we are calling it the nodular hyperplasia prostate. So if you zoom and see the glandular elements, you can see the two layers of glands. Okay, the one is the luminal columnar epithelial cells and abluminal, the cuboidal epithelial cells, the basal cells. So this double presence of two layers of cells is nothing. It's a diagnostic of benign nodular hyperplasia prostate. Next important is the carcinoma prostate, which usually occurs in the elderly men between 65 and 75 years, and they range from indolent lesions that will never cause patient harm to aggressive pharyngitis. Because of metastasis. The simple way to know whether the patient is having carcinoma prostate, one is the estimation of serum PSA, second is a digital rectal examination. So the PSA is nothing but a prostatic cancer. By using serum, by taking the patient's serum, we can detect the PSA levels, prostatic specific antigen levels. Suppose if it is crossed beyond 4, so we can suspect the patient may have. So usually the prostatitis, the inflammation or infection of the prostate, usually also will elevate the PSA level, but it's not beyond 10. Okay, the 4 to 10 is the value for prostatitis. So if it crosses beyond 10, it should also most of the time you should suspect the malignancy. Next, how to differentiate from a benign prostatic hyperplasia and carcinoma. The person, you can estimate the percentage of free PSA. So the ratio of the free PSA to total PSA is lower in men with prostate cancer than in men with benign prostatic disease. Okay, so you should by using the free PSA also, so you can know whether it is because of cancer or something else. Next, pathogenesis of this testicular, prostate cancer. The most important again here is the androgens. Okay, so the most important stimulator is dihydrotestosterone. So what it will do is it will act on this. The testosterone will be converted into dihydrotestosterone with the help of 5-alpha reductase. Okay, this dihydrotestosterone is a very potent hormone which will act on both the epithelial and stromal elements of the prostate. What happens is it will stimulate the cells proliferation. In due course of time, what happens is the cells which got proliferated will become resistant to anti-androgen therapy because they often acquire mutations that permit androgen receptors to activate the expression of the target genes even in the absence of the hormones. Okay, so this is very, very important. So that's why, but most of the cases with prostate carcinoma, what we do is we do palliative surgery of archaectomy because the testis is the source where the testosterone. In most of the cases of prostate, what happens is we do archaectomy in order to reduce the dihydrotestosterone. Okay, but what you should also remember regarding the acquired mutations of the tumor. So because even without dihydrotestosterone, sometimes the tumor cells may proliferate. This point you should remember. Next is heredity. So suppose some first degree relative, the patient will have prostate cancer, again there is every chance that the next person may get the chance of, there is an increased chance of getting prostate cancer. Next, environmental influences like smoking, consumption of alcohol, and repeated bacterial infections. So all may lead to the prostate cancer. Next, acquired somatic mutations. There are two important mutations you should remember. One is the TPRSS2 and ETS fusion gene mutation, and another one is the phosphatidylation kinase AKT pathway. So what happens is they inactivate the tumor suppressor gene PTEN, especially this AKT pathway, the phosphatidylation kinase and AKT pathway. It will inactivate the tumor suppressor gene PTEN. So because of the inactivation of the tumor suppressor gene, what happens? The tumor cells will continuously proliferate, resulting in carcinoma. We already discussed that the carcinomas usually occur in the peripheral zone, and then the nodules, the irregular nodules, can be also palpated by using rectal examination. So microscopically, we discussed that in BPH we will have a double layer of glands, whereas in carcinoma we have a single layer of gland. And we do grading of prostatic cancer by Gleason system, and we give histology grade group, and we also stage by using PET scan. So for this patient, bone scan is essential because most of the times what happens is the bone metastases are osteoblastic. So they go for bone mets. So what happens is for bone mets, what we should do is radionuclide bone scan. So for other soft tissue metastases, we can go for the PET scan. And most of the localized cancers are clinically silent and can be detected by using PSA. So, and whereas the metastatic lesions can be detected by PET scan. And after doing surgery and during follow-up, what happens is if you do by using serum PSA, so we can know the burden of the burden of the disease and the burden of the tumor cells, and whether the patient is responding or not responding, or any the metastatic lesions which are secreting PSA. All these things we can know by even during the follow-up. Also, we should know detect the serum PSA. Okay. So this is the how it looks microscopically. You can see the adenocarcinoma of the prostate. So demonstrating small glands crowded in between the larger glands. You can see small glands in between the larger glands. And if you see, if you see in high power, if you see this glandular, the top layer contains the two types of cells, which is this is a benign gland, whereas the down one contains down small glands contains a single layer of cells. These are nothing but the tumor glands. So these are the tumor glands, and this is the normal glands. So it has a two layer. Here, if you see, it's only single layer. This is what is the difference between a prostate adenocarcinoma and a benign prostate hyperplasia. That's all for today. So thank you so much for participating. Any doubts if you have, you can ask me.
Sir.
And Chapama.
Sir, internal 2 exam pattern ela untadi, sir?
I think Vahini madam will tell you regarding that internal exam. I think it is the same pattern as that. Actually, today I am going to the principal office for actually knowing that pattern. They said but you come at 3 o'clock, we will discuss how to conduct the internal exam like that. So we'll let you know the pattern.
Okay, sir.
Any other doubts?
No, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. How is the today's class? Is it okay, or is it fast or slow, or you are unable to understand anything?
It's okay, sir. It's nice, sir.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I will actually what I will do. I will send you this class in WhatsApp group.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.